everyone, and welcome to today's Catalyst Story session, Writing to Sell or Staff. I'm your host and director of Catalyst Story Institute, Nikki Coble, and today our guest is Kelly Edwards. She has been a producer, a TV writer, an executive, and is now the author of The Executive Chair, A Writer's Guide to TV Series Development, which is our January must-read book. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be your must read.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. I loved reading the book myself. It's full of gems, but is also a quick read, and I just devoured it. And I think it is essential reading. So we definitely wanted to add that to our list for the month. You have such a unique perspective as someone who has been on the executive side and on the creator side, and have also just been such a wonderful friend to us over the years that we love getting to spend this time with you. So thank you again for being here. I would love to circle back to the beginning for the writers in the group in terms of our ideas and setting our goals, because not every writer is going to have the same goal when they're creating their work. Some writers may want to come up with an idea and sell it, and some may want to use it as a sample to get staffed. Why are those distinctions so important to consider?
Well, I think you're right. People have very different ideas about what they want for their career. I think there's also a lot of different opportunities now. So you have, I mean, you can get a job writing in a lot of different ways. I mean, a lot of people that I'm talking to right now are looking at podcasts and audiobooks in ways that those things didn't exist as avenues, 5 years ago. So I think that the more we are sort of progressing out of broadcast television and even cable television, and the more it's becoming a little bit more of the wild, wild west, I do think that we're going to see more opportunities to do varying different, different kinds of things and to use the content that we are creating in a lot of different ways. I think even what you guys do at Catalyst showcasing not only the written word but also the visual, so proof of concepts. There's so many different ways to use those things. You can use them as standalone short films, or you can use them as proof of concepts for a larger feature, as writing samples or directing samples. So there's just a lot of different ways that you can use that content. Not everything is going to work for every or for every need. Some things I think too, like if you're writing a short film script and it is a standalone and there's no series idea or concept behind it, it can just exist as its thing, as it's on its own.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think that knowing who you are and as a writer and knowing what you want to do as a writer and having a really clear idea will only help you to get further, a lot farther,
Mhm.
um, uh, right off the bat. So if you have a goal, great. If you don't have a goal, that's also okay. You can find your way through. I certainly did. It wasn't a straight line for me. It was like all over the place. And then
Right.
eventually I wound up as a staff writer on a show, but that wasn't necessarily the that was sort of the goal, but it wasn't necessarily the most direct route, the one that I
Right.
took.
Of course, and now, I mean, there's even other iterations of this, like you said, there's more than just these 2 pathways we'll talk about today. There are some people who are writing a novel so that they'll have the IP to then develop something further, which is a whole other session we could do. But for the
Exactly.
moment, now that we have broken those down, what is your best advice for someone who is looking to sell? And then we can cover someone who's looking to staff.
Yeah, I think if you're looking to sell, I think there's got to be a reason for you just to want to sell an idea and walk away. I mean, for me, it feels like that is the path maybe a producer takes. They
Mm,
don't want to stay with the idea, but I feel as though if you are a writer and you have an idea and it's your baby, the chances are that you're going to really want to stay with it. Whether you're a feature writer and you're selling that idea to go get made, you
mhm,
still have deliverables. So they're still going to ask you for revisions. It's still going to be built into your deal. You're still going to have to stay with it for some time, even if it's a finite entity and it's not going to be a Marvel, multiverse, kind of platform for you to ride out onto the sunset. It's not going to be necessarily a Star Wars franchise, but it might be a one-off kind of piece. You still have when you make that deal, you are still going to have to stick with it for as long as it goes,
Right.
even if it's just the year that you're writing on it before it goes into production. So I think you have to figure out, why would you want to just create something and then let it go off into the universe? There are opportunities too of, if you're a piece of talent, let's just say you're a stand-up or you're an actor and you are writing something, whether it's you're writing a short film, or you're writing a one-woman show, or you're writing a particular piece that you have to then hand it off to someone else to produce, like Issa Rae did with Awkward Black Girl, and then turning that into Insecure. She wasn't able to be in the room every day, but I'm sure she was incredibly involved in how her character was moving through the world. So there was a level of input, even if she couldn't necessarily write every script.
Mhm.
So you have to wonder why you would want to walk away. I do think that there are probably opportunities, like you said, in terms of the novel world, where you're writing a book and it's a piece of IP, but you aren't necessarily comfortable, writing those scripts. I
Uh-huh.
don't know if George R. R. Martin was in the writer's room for Game of Thrones. That's a really interesting thing to ask. I don't know. My guess is he was writing his other books. So there
Mhm.
may be a reason why you'd want to sell that IP and then continue on doing whatever you're doing, whatever your path is. But I think for the most part, if you're going to sell something and it's an idea that you've been living with, and we all live with these ideas for years at a time, they sort of sit in the back of your head if they're not on the page yet, that you want to make sure that you're going to see it through, so that that vision is realized the way that you want it to be.
Mhm.
As for
Mhm.
staffing, when you're staffing and you're writing to get on staff, there may be a lot of different reasons to write a particular piece of material. And I'll just give you a little example from my own life. I have most of my samples are half hour, and they're comedy, and there's no mistaking that they're in that vein.
Mhm.
But I got staffed on a drama. Now, I think the reason I got staffed on this drama is that I brought level of lightness to it. So it sort of is not completely outside of my lane, but it is a little bit of a departure. So I widened up that pathway for myself. So now I could staff again on a comedy because I have all those samples, but I could staff on another drama. So just before the holidays, I spoke to my managers and I said, now that I've staffed on a drama, shouldn't I have a drama spec? Because the other drama piece that I have in my arsenal is a dark, supernatural kind of thriller horror kind of thing. It's got this really cool element to it. And so it was very much a departure for me, but it was actually something that I had written back in 2007, and I had rewritten just so that I would have another piece of material. So I said, well, look, now that I've already been on a show, shouldn't I have a drama sample so that you can canvas the town with this drama sample? And they go, yes, absolutely. Go ahead and write one. And they said, can you please write something that's a light family drama? I think they were looking for, This Is Us kind of thing from me.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
just finished the script. Well, then that's going to give me that's going to give me more opportunities. I'd still want to staff probably on another lighter show as opposed to something dark and brooding. So
Mhm.
that's the sample that I'm putting out there. But so I'm writing that not to sell it. I don't think it's a show necessarily that I would want to, do 5 years on.
Right.
And it's my
Right.
own thing. It's a personal story about my personal life, but it is enough to show people that I can write something. So it was just it was developed as a sample, not to
Mhm.
sell. But
Mhm.
I do think you need to make sure that you continually have material that you are developing, whether you're going to use it to sell or you're going to staff.
It's worth mentioning as we go through this, just for anybody who might not know, what is the difference between something that you're writing that is your own idea and something that is spec, writing on
Well,
spec?
the funny thing is that we use that term spec. It's speculative. So
Right.
everything that we do
It's all
is
speculative.
spec. It's all spec.
Yes.
But we tend to use the term spec versus sample, a pilot sample or pilot original pilot. We use that usually to mean that it's an original piece of material that's come from whole cloth out of your brain. And we usually use spec as, well, we're specking out an existing show. So it's something that's usually an A-list show. It's been on for the last year or two. It's gotten some heat or critical acclaim. or some wildly, great ratings, so that it's something that people will be aware of. Because what you don't want to do is to write a sample script or spec script on something that's so obscure that no one's going to know if you got it right or not. You need to write
Mhm.
something that feels like people have pretty much seen it. And it's hard in this day and times, because there's a thousand shows out there. So
Yep.
you really have to figure out, well, what's one of those things that people are watching right now that they're pretty much going to know, if you've hit the mark or you haven't hit the mark. And there's
Right.
some lists out there. I think that probably ABC and Warner Brothers, I think they do require you to write a spec to get into their programs. Most likely, those are the people who, if you look on their website, they usually have a list of, hey, these are the things that you should look at potentially,
Right.
writing.
Right. And from their own house, usually probably too, that ABC is not necessarily gonna direct you to Ted Lasso per se, unless they're
No,
creating
no,
something that
no.
is like that.
I think they would. I think what they're looking for in a spec is, it doesn't matter what network it's from. They just want to know if they have read or they're familiar with that show. That's what they want. I'm sure they wouldn't
Mhm.
want to have, I don't know, I guess the Connors is on ABC, right? Or the
Sure, right.
Goldbergs. They wouldn't want
Right.
to have like 50 Goldbergs. I'm sure that would just make their eyes cross. So I
Right.
think a Ted Lasso would be a nice departure,
So
something
something
else
in
out
the
there.
zeitgeist, right,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
everybody has seen that you can say,
Right.
"Ah, yes, that is that." Right, that
Exactly.
it
Do an
fits the
Emily in
bill.
Paris. Yeah, yeah,
Right,
exactly.
of
Right.
course, absolutely.
Yeah.
And how does a writer know if they have a strong enough concept for a show or if the show has legs?
That's tricky. I think the way I think about this, because things have changed, right? So now you could have a show. Let's take it Insecure. It's only gone 5 seasons. It had what, 8 to 10 episodes per season, something like that. So things are shorter in terms of orders. But in the old days, um, particularly when we're talking about broadcast, they were looking at, you had to get 100 episodes out of a show so they could go into syndication. So the idea was, well, you need to have 100 episodes worth of ideas. So if you could tell me what episode 3, 7, 26, and 50 are, then you have a show with legs. So that's
Mm,
that's the old model. But I think it still holds up. If you see that there's at least that you can generate idea after idea, and it's not something that feels like, oh, by episode 5 you're going to run out of story, then your show has legs. Um, and I think there's some components that fit into that. It's about your character. Does that character have a really interesting, unique point of view that moves through the world unlike any other character, so that you could lift that character out of that show and place it in another show, and it would still be equally as interesting to watch. So that character dynamic has to be strong. And if you've got a really great character, and think about your favorite show, that person, that character at the center of it is dynamic and interesting and intriguing for a reason, and you come back to, not because of what they're doing at that particular time, but because you want to see how they move through the world.
right.
So even if you think about Elementary and how they twisted Sherlock Holmes, he was a drug addict. He was sort of sexy. He, slept with a lot of women. Not the same kind of Sherlock Holmes that you knew from the old days. He was
Mhm.
really, really different and operated in today's society in a very different way. And then he had a companion who was complementary. So I think that dynamic was really interesting, and you wanted to see, well, how does Sherlock Holmes work today in today's, urban city, with all of the challenges that he had. So I do think that if you are looking for, if you're looking to test how if your concept's going to work, ask yourself, if it unless it's going to be a limited series and it's only going to be 8 episodes, what would episode 10 and 12 be? What would episode 30 be? And
Mhm.
you may then figure out, oh, it is a series, or oh, it's a limited series, or guess what?
Right.
It's a movie. If your character dies at the end of your pilot, it's a movie.
Right. Hot
If there's
tip.
nowhere to go, it's a
Mhm.
movie.
Right. So it's about the story world and the character dynamics having enough interest or being ripe enough that the ways that they come together and intersect will continue to generate ideas, as opposed to, well, we could send them to the DMV and we can send them to the mall. And it's not quite so
Right.
simple as that. We
Although
have
Larry
to.
David doing either of those things is a series. But I
There's
would say
always an
though,
exception.
exactly, there's always an exception. But I do think that, when you're talking about concept, when you put that character into whatever situation, whatever world, as you just said, that there has to be conflict within that dynamic. So I say in the book too, putting Piper in who's like a privileged little white girl, very innocent, into a maximum security prison, that's conflict because you
Mhm,
know that her point of view about life mixed with the, relentless brutalism and sort of unrelenting world that she's entering, it's going to be rife with story.
mhm.
And I think if you don't have that, if your character's not put through the paces in whatever environment they're in, then you haven't necessarily worked your concept. You haven't given them enough trials and tribulations to put them through.
Mhm.
So be
And
aware of
that
that.
that way it reminds me of like a Breaking Bad is a similar example of a character has to learn a world that they're immersed in. They have to navigate that world and then suddenly they're commanding that world. Those are big leaps forward for a character that will allow it
Right.
to go over multiple seasons as opposed to
Exactly.
the character wins the man in the end and gee, we're done at the 5th episode, right?
Exactly. Right, right, right. And
Right.
let's talk about Breaking Bad for a second. So Breaking Bad puts, I mean, the most unlikely character. He is a mild-mannered school teacher, chemistry teacher with an ailment. You could not have broken that character more before you
Mhm.
put him up against the worst possibly think about the worst villain that he could possibly go up against. Someone who's going to test him on all of those fronts. He's got
Mhm.
a family he's got to protect. He's got a son who's got a disability. He's got a baby on the way. He's got a wife who's, you know, um, who he needs to satisfy in many ways. And yet you've given Walter White, like, the worst possible hill to climb, and that makes great television. So figure
Absolutely.
out how to take that character, whoever you wanna craft that character to be, and then put him in the most or her in the most, um, terrible situation possible, and let's see how it comes out on the end.
Yeah, stacking the deck against them. It
Right.
feels cruel, but it's important, I think, for the journey of that show. And then how do you know if your project will resonate with today's audience?
Well, I think that we all know what we're all going through. So obviously we're going through a pandemic. Station 11 came out. It's all pandemic. Um, I think when you looked at Handmaid's Tale, we were all going through this the assault on Planned Parenthood and women's rights. I think those things are really very clearly zeitgeisty, and yet they were also things that sort of were written before,
Mhm.
the pandemic, written before all of this was happening. But I think you could see that there was a um, that those waves were coming. So I think if you are just aware and you're out there in the world, you're going to know that we're all talking generally about the same thing.
Mhm.
It's not like there's a whole lot of things that we don't know together. And I think if you're tapping into that, you'll know what's relevant. And I think you could also take something that seems like it's out of time and then figure out a way to make it current. So it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily have to look on the surface to be relevant, but those themes underneath it, we're always going to have stories about family and about loss and about love and about the coming together. And I think that when I look at something like a Game of Thrones, and I've had this conversation with people before, and they go, "Yeah, it's about the battle for the throne." I go, "I didn't show up for that. I didn't care
Mm.
about that. I didn't care who won in the end. What I cared about was in the pilot there was a family, and the family was scattered to the four ends of the earth." And every single time they got closer together, our hearts leapt out of our chest. And when the red wedding came and it decimated our hope that those two characters were going to rejoin our core. When
Mhm.
Ned was killed and he couldn't rejoin our core, our hearts broke.
Yeah.
That's great television.
Mhm.
So the whole of Game of Thrones had nothing to do with the throne. That was
Mhm.
the mechanism. That was plot. The
Yep.
story was um, Bran and all the characters who were coming back. And
Yeah.
when they finally reunited, oh my God, wasn't that's what we waited for. That's why
Yeah.
we all we're sobbing and we were laughing and rejoicing because that's what the story was.
Mhm.
So I think if you can find things that and that's family. So that's about family. It's about family and it's about forgiveness and it's about every single one of those characters needing to be accepted for who they were. If you think about it, every single one of those characters, particularly the ones who were left, because
Yeah,
those
yeah.
those are the ones at the end. They were all seeking redemption and acceptance.
Mhm.
They were all um, they were all deeply, deeply flawed. Remember, Arya in the very beginning wanted to fight like the boys,
Right.
and desperately wanted to, and left everybody. She wanted to fight so bad she left everybody.
Mhm.
Um, Jon Snow was the bastard. Do
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Everybody had a flaw that they wanted. And I'm not going to say forgiveness for, because it not necessarily forgiveness, but they were trying to overcome. They were trying for someone to love them in spite of who they thought they should not be or could not be.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
find those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be, super, you know, current and it's got to be today.
Right.
It can be very universal. It can be incredible, and we're always struggling with certain universal truths. So just make sure that it feels as authentic and rich and deep as you can go. How much can you unearth from your psyche and your heart and your trauma, whether it's a comedy or drama, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But how much can you dredge up and and explain on the page so that someone else can find their connection and their healing from it? I think that's when you get
Absolutely.
the best kind of television.
Mhm. Because there are those common threads, those universal truths, the truth about humanity that we keep tuning in for, even though it's happening in a made up world, or even though it's
Right.
happening in space or whatever it is. I mean, I had somebody assign me the books before it came out, and I threw the 3rd book across the room because I was invested in that family, and then when it says, "The axe took her in the back of the head," I was like, "This is ridiculous. I will never I can't believe you made me read this. The whole point was this family." And they were like, "No, no, no." You said, "But
Right.
you hooked me." So it's that. It's these universal truths that we see in these threads. I mean, I might not identify with Rami's story, or with Issa Rae's story, but there are threads of that that do speak to my human truth. And so figuring out what that is for me as a writer would be the place where you want to start. What do all those things have in common? The threads about family, the love, the honor, all of that
Right.
stuff. Find out where the flaws are that are juicy about the things we are ashamed of, right? And we
Right.
don't tell others about. How do we work
Yes.
through those things? That's
Right.
beautiful. I would love to know, what kind of research can we do to target ideal platforms for the series?
Well, the internet is our friend, so use the internet. I think that
Mhm,
the first thing we all do is when we watch television.
mhm,
So the more you watch, the more you know, hey, I watch only the shows on CW. They're great. Well, you know that they do, a lot of YA stuff. They do some superhero stuff, but they have a very specific lane. Every network has a personality.
mhm,
So, you're doing that first bit of research by following what you love because the things that you love are the things you're going to create more of. So just do the online, go to your cable company, go to your DirecTV, go to your streamer, and just watch what they put on there. I think there are some places that are a little harder to tag. Netflix obviously has a very, very broad, it doesn't really have a very particular personality yet. Some of
mhm,
the places that have very, very, specific, we know who we are. I think Showtime is very specific. Stars is really specific. There are some places that do very, very edgy fare or do very female fare. So
mhm,
you will know based on what they've done and who they've worked with before. Are they a place that takes only pitches from people who are, super high up the food chain? Or is
mhm,
it a very kind of open playing field? Are they taking risks? Are they looking at people who have new ideas? So are they taking things that are just IP driven? So you can figure that out. Obviously, you're not gonna I'm never gonna take a project to Marvel
right,
because it's Marvel. They have
right,
their own brand.
yeah,
Um, so I think that you just have to do that research, look at what they're buying, look on deadline, look at Variety and Hollywood Reporter and see, well, if it's a movie, well, who's buying that movie?
Mhm.
And where to, so that's, that's your way to sort of figure it out. There's still some trades magazines out there that lists productions as well. So go look that up. And then I
Mhm.
would also say look at the producers who are taking specific things in because they also have brands. They also have a lot of them do have, hey, this is my lane. I'm staying in the horror genre. If
Right.
you're gonna go to Blumhouse, Blumhouse does very specific kinds of horror. So, that might be up the alley for a particular writer, particular idea.
And it's important, I think, to mention that there is a timeline of these things. We all have an idea in our heads, or some of us have an idea in our heads, that the first time that I get a meeting with someone who's an executive, that I'll walk out of that meeting with a check and we're going into production next week and it's going to be on TV the week after that. Not how it happens. Would that it
Yeah,
were. But by
right.
the time that you're seeing something that gives you an idea, or what's currently out now, may not be on the air by the time what you have filmed would come out, right? Because there's a length of time for development and discussions and whether something's getting picked up or not if you do shoot it. So there's a long timeline, and we don't have to worry
Yeah.
about threading the needle. This is going to be a terrible mixed metaphor, but we don't have to thread the needle for the buffet that currently is, because we don't currently is it terrible, but we don't get to see that unless you have access, if your reps have access to the mandates and things like that, to kind of know where they're going.
Right.
But it's very hard to align yourself with what they will want. So you may as well do what's true to you and trust that if that
Exactly.
connects, it will
Agreed.
align.
Right. And some of those things, there's so many stories about, people who had an idea and nobody bought it. And then finally somebody bought it. Same thing with I think Sopranos made the rounds. Um Mad Men made the rounds. Like so many places, there's so many stories
Hmm.
about how nobody wanted it and then finally, you know, somebody somebody bought it. So I
Hmm.
do feel like you have to stay true to yourself. You just never know. And right now the networks are bought up, 3 years in advance. They know what their schedule is for the next 3 years.
Right.
Part of that is that's just how it always works. They already always have things in the future. But the other part of it is COVID made a huge backlog. So there's all this content that's waiting to be put out there. So they are, so just do you because
Hmm.
someone will want you.
And you did mention this earlier, and I think it's important to circle back, where in terms of packaging, people may not know entirely what that means, but who I align myself with, what director and producer I attach, or what showrunner is interested in my show and has a similar line of thinking, and where they have their deals. So, in terms of packaging, when is it necessary to partner with talent or with a production company?
Well, I do think that some of that is driven by where you want to sell it. Because what I've heard recently is that Netflix wants big packages. And my guess is that uh, they've made a lot of producer deals. So again, if you're going to go to Netflix, you might want to go in through one of their known producers. They've made those deals for a reason. They want content from those people. So
Hmm.
it might be a sure bet to go through them as opposed to you if you don't have any kind of, credits,
Hmm.
you just trying to get in there unless they love your idea. You're making that first. You're trying to chip away at the big blob of marble,
Hmm.
and it's easier when you've got the mallet of a Jay-Z behind you, or you've got the Obamas or somebody else who are
Right.
whacking away at that trying to make that sculpture of David, where you just like are trying to chip away. So I do feel like there's look at the networks that you're trying to sell to, or the studio, the production companies. Who are they working with? Those will help you make the right moves. It's hard because especially if you're an emerging piece of talent and maybe you haven't won a contest. You haven't won the blacklist,
Hmm.
or gotten your script listed up there. And you are really just you've got this really great idea and it's this little gem, but you don't necessarily have reps. Well, it's really, really hard to put those things together. And I think you got to lean on all of your relationships. And if your buddies and your buddies friends with, Kevin Hart, get to Kevin Hart however you can.
Hmm.
You know, I had
Hmm.
a so I was on this I did this thing called Rockabirdie, which I just love. I've done it a couple of times, but it's like a retreat. So it's a writer's retreat, and people sign up, and they pay their money, and there's like four of us, and we're all mentoring these young writers. And one of the gals who did it with me is a woman named Joan Lane, who was the producer um, of the King's Speech. And she tells this beautiful story about how she had this really beautiful, I think it was a play originally. She had this play, and they turned it into a screenplay, and she wanted to get it to Jeffrey Rush. And so she she just sort of stalked Jeffrey Rush and then put it on his, like, she drove over and she put it on his doorstep. And she got to him the any way that she could get to him.
Mhm.
So I don't recommend stalking, but you just have to use your you have to we are really literally almost like 2 to 3 degrees away from almost everybody, so
Mhm.
use what you can. And then
Mhm.
sometimes it's not gonna work right this second, in the way that you want it to, and
Right.
sometimes you are going to have to wait and build up your relationships and build up your reservoir um, uh, of contacts, and it may take a minute. So what are you gonna do in the
Mhm.
meantime? Well, you can do so many things in the meantime. You can create content in a lot of different ways, and then just keep that little gem of a script, and then eventually it will be the right time for that thing to be birthed. But
Mhm.
we can't give up, and we have to remember that there are so many ways to skin this cat, and there's so many ways to have a career as a writer in this business, and they
Mhm.
don't look like straight lines. Almost never do they look like a straight line. Look, mine looked like a big old circle.
Mhm.
So there are ways through programs and through contests. There are ways through friends, production, um, festivals. Write your IP, write your either your you can write as a screenplay, you could write as a short film, you could film it, you can put up a web series like Issa Rae did. You can make your tiny furniture film to go to South by. You can
Mhm.
make your audiobook, you can write a graphic novel, you can make a one woman play or one man play.
Mhm.
Um, there are a thousand things you can do. You can start blogging on your website, whatever you want to do, you just keep writing. And then eventually that path is going to open up for you.
Mhm. Absolutely, and I think it's also about the breadth of material. You mentioned that you had 3 comedy scripts and a feature and something that was spec, and people do go through those things pretty quickly, right? Your reps, once they've
Yes,
shared them, you don't get to have the 2 scripts you have, and it takes you through 10
that's it.
years of your career. It's not a
No, no, no.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's really, really important for people to know. And again, it gets back to the are you writing to sell or are you writing to staff? If you're writing to staff, you're writing for a career. If you're
Mhm.
writing to sell and you want that one thing you want to get out, I don't know. I don't know. Is that a career? Is that 40 years of your life? Is that 50 years of
Mm.
your life? Is that what you're I think most people who are writing in this business, and again, you could write a lot of different. I have a friend who writes jingles, and she writes, so she writes like promos and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and but I think that there's so many ways to make a living at this. And if you think about playing the long game, you're in this business for from your 20s to your 60s. It's a long time. You're building a universe of contacts because I like to say it's like my Mayberry RFD. Everyone knows each other pretty
Mhm.
much. I feel like I can get to just about anybody in 2 calls. That happens for everybody because eventually we are all at the same parties all the time,
Yeah.
and someone knows someone. So think about the long game. There's virtually no time in your life where you're going to, if you're desperately wanting to be a writer, where you're going to want to build that thing and then you're going to throw it off and let somebody else have it. That's just not going to happen. You're going to want to be a part of that life of that thing
Mhm.
because you've invested your time and your energy into it. So if you want that whole career, then invest in yourself and invest in your material and have your wealth and keep generating stuff. So yes, I have 3 pilots, a spec Atlanta. I have a stack of short film scripts, one of which actually, I'm gonna say one of which has gotten me has been supplementary material that has helped me get and move my career forward. I have a whole stack of blogs that I did, like little short stories that I did that I shared on Facebook about.
Mhm.
It was called Bus Stories. It's on my website. I think it's what am I, kellyedwards.co, I think, something like that. But it's on there and that will show you that was supplementary material that went to Sundance. A friend of mine was sitting with the lady who brought people into Sundance and my friend Catherine said, "Hey, have you read her bus stories?" And Jen was like, "No, I haven't." So she asked me to send her the bus story. So that helped. So
Mhm.
whatever you have, all of that stuff can be helpful. But I have that, the bus stories, I have the feature, I have the sci-fi drama thingy. Um, and I think I think that's what I started with.
Mhm.
Those first 2 scripts got burned up really fast. The first one went through the town. That was the door opener. That was the "Hey, here she is." That was the thing that got me into Sundance. That got me into my MFA program, but that went through like wildfire. And that was the first thing. And then everybody always wants a second piece of material to make sure that you are for legit and that
Mhm.
you didn't just sit there and write that one script over 7 years. They
Yeah.
want that second one, and that will go through super quickly. And then you need a third piece of material pretty quickly after that. So you should have at least 3 pieces of material. And it doesn't have to be a script. It should probably be a script, but it could be that short story or the blogs or whatever it is. It could be a great Twitter feed. It could be something interesting and dynamic or
Mhm.
whatever it is, but they want that third thing. And then you have to churn something out every so often.
Yeah.
So every couple months, you need another piece of material, whatever that's going to be. And for me right now, it's this family drama because I know that I need another piece of material to keep the staffing opportunities open.
Mhm, mhm, and it's also keeping your skills sharp as you do it,
Yeah.
right? That you're also not stuck on one idea. We can't be the Gollum with the
Yeah,
precious and the one script. We need to
that's good.
have yes, exactly. We might have at least have multiple rings if you're gonna do it that way, but that things that you're passionate about, because that also, I think, shows different facets of you too, right?
Right.
That if you're sitting in a meeting with someone and you say, "I do comedy," that is it, the end. And they go, great, we've got something like that, or our slate is very much like this. What about this vein?
Right.
You can't be left
You can't just have that
without.
one thing. Right,
Right,
right, right.
right.
And hopefully you'll over the course of those 40 years, you're gonna have many ideas.
Hmm.
You're gonna have hopefully you will have 25 ideas that you're
Hmm.
selling or that you're pushing forward.
Right.
So keep going. It's
Absolutely. And then,
hard, it's not easy.
right.
It's easy to think things up. It's not necessarily easy to execute well, but
And
that's the
that's,
whole beauty of this.
yeah, well, and it's a great transition because we've heard time and again at Catalyst different producers or different execs or writers telling us about a moment where someone went in to pitch to them, or they were the ones pitching and they said, "Oh, I've got this. Oh no, we don't need that. Oh, I've got this. Oh, we've got something like that." And then, "Oh, thanks so much for your time. Hey, by the way, I've got this other thing that I worked on a couple years ago. Oh, that. Tell us about that." And that's the thing that went. And so
Right.
it brings me to my next question, which is, we all know that sometimes it's as small as an elevator pitch is your opportunity to open a door with somebody of, "Oh, wait, I'm listening. What is that?" What advice do you have about crafting a strong log line?
Okay, this is first of all, log lines are hard, but they're also easy. They're also very it's easy to know the construct. Super, super simple.
Mhm,
I think what people have to remember is a log line should not be there to tell the story, it is there to sell the story. So a great log line,
mm,
I'll say good log line is character goal obstacle. So if you have those 3 things, that's a good log line.
mhm,
A great log line includes a level of irony. So it's character goal, and it could be character obstacle goal. It doesn't have to be in that order,
mhm,
but there should be a level of irony to it. The irony is the part that tells you that the character, as we went back to before, your character who has a very specific point of view about life, is a very quirky, interesting person, is up against the worst foe imaginable for that character. That's how you're going to tell your story. That's how you're going to tell your screenplay story, or you're going to tell your series story.
mhm,
Um, and that's where the irony comes from. So, for example, if you're gonna do Silence of the Lambs, and you're talking about that with whatever that log line is, and I'm not gonna craft it for you, but I'll tell you
Mm,
the most important elements are that Clarice Starling is a novice FBI agent.
mhm,
They put her in conflict with the worst criminal known to
mhm,
man in order to her goal is to find capture the other criminal, right? So she's captured her goal is to capture the criminal, the bad guy who is skinning women, and dressing in their
yep.
clothes in their
Ugh,
as he's putting them on. But but she's not up against a robber. She's not up against uh a pickpocket. That there's no conflict there. She's
mm-mm.
up against a man who has eaten people.
Yeah.
That's the worst
Deadly
possible
cannibal.
person
Yeah.
who ever walks the earth, the most heinous person. So
Mhm,
that's where the irony comes in, is that she is now up against she's up against a in order to capture a criminal, she has to enlist the aid of a criminal. There's irony
mhm,
in that.
mhm,
If you think about The Godfather, The Godfather is Michael Corleone was a first of all, you can on something like Godfather or even Silence of the Lambs, they were both books, so you can use based on a best-selling novel. So sometimes those things are a little bit, I can say, longer, maybe in a log line if you want to add that part.
mhm,
But Michael Corleone was a war hero and a college student. He is everything that his family was not. He was the shining star. He was the model of um, upright, stand up kind of American,
mhm.
but he's drawn back into the world of his family. He's taking over his family business, and the family business is the mafia. It's not a fucking bakery, it's the
Right.
mafia. Irony for you.
Yes.
And when you can see that major conflict and that there's irony to it, then you understand I want to watch that movie.
Yep.
Think about any of your favorite TV shows. Think about the fact that Ted Lasso, the most optimistic man in the world and an American, is going to teach football to the Brits, who are
Mhm.
arguably better at it than we ever were, right?
Yeah.
So he comes from football. He's teaching this, or he's coming in to teach soccer, and he's up against the most cynical people on the planet. There's
Mhm.
irony in that. If you can capture that in one sentence, then you've got a great log line. Then I'm leaning
Yeah.
forward. Then I want to know that. I want to buy that idea. The
Mhm.
the thing that people get tripped up about log lines is that they want to tell the whole story. And so usually it's like, I want to be literal. Well, she's actually, she picks flowers in the daytime and then she goes to da 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 and she drinks tea, da da da, and then she's a serial killer at night. I don't need to know all that. I need to
Mhm.
know she's a quirky serial killer. That's all I need to know. I need an adjective and the character noun. So she is I don't know, she is a celebrated chef. She is hopefully it's something a little bit at odds. So I
Mhm.
think that the idea of a novice FBI agent gives you that conflict already.
Mhm.
So give me something that's sort of gonna that descriptor before your noun of who that person is should be interesting and dynamic on its own. And then put that person in complete opposition to the world.
Right.
That's
Right.
all I need to know. And then what the goal is.
Because even in what you just said, you've already shown those dynamics of inexperience at a highly skilled job,
Yeah,
putting her against someone who is the highest skill of their crime or what they do, and so that to me immediately tells me as an audience member or somebody who's listening to the log line that there's inherent risk. There are high stakes.
right.
This will wobble and waver, and we're going to be excited to watch this person try to triumph in the face of this kind of conflict. It
Exactly.
can't just be, you know, sexy badass women doing sexy badass things. Yay, right? That's not
Yeah,
enough of a
yeah, put them
compelling
out
show.
there, yeah, out of their
Right.
element. Right, right.
There
Yeah,
has to
yeah.
be more to go with. And lastly, this is just one question we've been loving to ask everybody that do you think the major networks and streaming platforms are ready to begin buying indie TV shows directly from content creators?
I would hope so. I would hope so.
Be great.
I think that the business is changing rapidly. We are
Mhm.
and I don't know what the next iteration of this is gonna be. It feels like we are hovering right now in this world, and the ship has not landed yet, but I would hope so. Look, we've got mega franchises on the film side that are coming into television at a rapid rate. We've got a world that's been taken over by Marvel and by some of these other bigger, you know, franchises. But there's still, I think, really interesting things happening in the indie world. I think that the voices are coming up out of the indie world, and they're coming out in these really interesting. Is it Seal It in the Spades, I think, came out of South by not South by, Sundance last year.
Mhm, mhm,
Like, there's some things that are just sort of they pop up and they go and you go, "Oh, I'm really interested in that. I'm really." And where else are you gonna find people are not born out of whole cloth and into the Marvel world. We all come up from somewhere, we all cut our teeth on something. Every great director has did a short film.
mhm.
So someone starts somewhere and then we grow into Steven Spielberg or whatever, but we start
Right.
somewhere small. So and that'll always happen because you have to cut your teeth and you have to figure out how to do it wrong before you can do it right. And by the way, never feel like you cannot fail. You should fail and fail big as much as possible because that's where interesting, fun, new things come out. And
Mhm,
I wish for I actually feel like we are if anything, we need to start to look at content in a radically different way.
mm,
I'm sad that we don't have enough comedy out there in the world. It's very, very dark right now.
yeah.
And I'm sad that we haven't figured out a way to create new monsters. I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, if I see one more vampire um uh zombie kind of thing, I'm just gonna curl up in a little ball. But I
Yeah.
feel like we've been telling the same stories for centuries. So how long ago was, Mary Shelley and Frankenstein? How long ago
Mhm,
was the Dracula story? It was like we keep telling the same story.
right.
Why have we not created something new? What's our new boogeyman? What's the new thing? Why do
Mhm,
we keep I also think about things like, all right, let's take a Game of Thrones, for example, or Wheel of Time, or any of these new, epic shows, epic
right.
things. Why is it that in the future, because I think they're all sort of futuristic, but sort of past or revisionists of past, or but there's elements of future. I don't know. I don't know what they are, but whatever these things are, these epic things. Lord of the Rings. I don't know if it takes place Middle Earth. I don't know if it's future or past, whatever. But they all go back to a feudal time.
Mhm.
And I wonder what it is about us that we never seem to get away from feudalism. Like what is the person who is coming up with the new future? The future that doesn't look dystopian, the future that
Mhm.
looks more like 2001. I haven't seen those. Where are
Right.
those? Where are those stories about imagining a bright new crazy weird something else that happens? Why do we keep telling the same story in the
Mhm.
same way? With lords and knights and ladies and
Right. And
Huzzah!
genuflecting, yes.
Exactly, which there's a place for that, but I feel as though we keep getting in this time loop of something. I just feel like someone's got to blow the lid off of our content and the way that we are thinking about storytelling because
Mhm.
we cannot keep telling the same story over and over in the same way. That's what I loved about The Harder They Fall. I had not seen a black western
No.
in forever, since maybe, a gajillion years ago.
Yep.
So I'm thinking, where what was that, Silverado maybe? So I'm thinking, well, why don't we have more? Because there's a lot of places that brown and black people have existed that we just never told those stories, and
Mhm.
let's tell something different, and then let's add something interesting to it. So
And in a new way too. I mean, that had an element of stylization that I enjoyed in watching it, that added to the story to say, not
right.
only am I doing this, but I'm putting my stamp on a Western,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which
And he
was really
comes
fun
from
to watch.
music. So
Mhm.
he infused the music, that was a major part of telling that story.
Mhm.
So that music, the music video kind of quality to it as well. But I do feel
Absolutely.
like we have to start serving up some really interesting visions of our world
Mhm.
for them people to buy. And but I hope that there's more, that they're busting open the doors. I think that we will, because I do think in this world of, like I said, podcasts and audiobooks and people creating things that are wildly divergent from the norm and coming in through a different door, those kinds of things have to start landing.
Yeah. Yeah. And certainly as the more platforms and places that streamers things now, there's IMDb TV and others. I know YouTube Red might be shutting down, I think, or
I
YouTube
think
might be shutting
so.
down its originals, but there
Right,
are constantly more places and that's a demand for content. And so where are you not seeing your voice be represented? Get in that
right.
space.
And look at TikTok, and look at the fact that what was the movie? I just saw the movie. Zola
Mhm.
was a thread on Twitter. So I do
Crazy.
feel as though there should be those kinds of things are going to come out eventually, and
Mhm.
hopefully something interesting will take over, you know. I would
That's
hope.
great. Yes. Well, I also know you have a lot of irons in the fire. Is there anything you'd like to share that we can be looking ahead toward in the coming window for you?
Well, my immediate next project, as we talked about before, we my immediate next project is um I do have this other book that's sort of sitting on my laptop. I delve into it every now and again, which is just about being in a writer's room, and some of the lingo and
Mhm.
deliverables that you need and things that you need to know about, sort of as follow up for to the executive chair. But what I'm really excited about is that I have been writing this novel, and I've been blogging about it on my website. So if you go to kellyedwards.co and you click on writing by and about, there's this whole tab about I'm writing a novel. And week after week, every week I'm going to post. This has been my process. I won't necessarily post the book itself. I might add some passages, but right now I'm really starting to work on the characters, the world, and I'm using this as sort of my outlet to show this is how I'm doing it, because
Mhm.
it's a completely new thing for me, but I want to share the process, and let's see
Mhm.
if it works. I'm really excited
Mhm.
about the idea. I've been holding on to this idea for a little bit. Um, we'll see if it ends up in the way that I think it's going to end up, because I think the characters have started to take on a life of their own. Um,
Mm.
I'm falling in love with some people. I want to kill some other people. It's a it's a mystery. It's a very Stephen Kingy kind of book. It's a paranormal cop thing piece. So I kind of feel like I want to see how it goes. But part of it is getting through the drudgery of I have to do the outline, and it's like, oh, I know where I want
Mhm.
to go, but I also
Mhm.
know it is a mystery, and the mystery part has to work just as the relationship parts have to work. And I think the relationships are there. It's the mystery that I'm like, ugh, I got to do the hard work. So I'm
Absolutely.
working
Yeah.
on that. That's my thing.
Well, I was very intrigued by what you shared with me over the phone. I was already like, "Oh, I want I want to devour this. I can't wait to see." But I know that's the hard part. The drudgery for a lot of actors is not for a lot of actors, but writers or actors who start to write, like myself, where it's like, "Oh, I've got this great idea." We don't just go from that to banging out pages. You have to
Right.
have an outline, a treatment. You have to break story at the right point. You have to sort of build that thing and reverse engineer to the dialogue that would be so cool to have in the scene. You can't just
Yeah.
start knocking out pages and go, "Look at my pilot." There's a whole other process before that, that those of us that
Right.
were new to it were surprised to see, to say, "Oh, man, there's a lot more involved of building a world that's viable in
Yes.
all the ways that you talked about."
And it could stymie you, and it could stop you. And I think the way that I get past some of the drudgery, because ultimately it's not drudgery if you really, really are committed to it. It is the part that stops me is um I have it in my head. Putting it down on paper seems like an extra step. The problem is when you don't put it down on paper, you run the risk of missing some interesting nuggets that might come out. So when I started to here's how I started this thing. I had my concept, I did a beat sheet, and then I really had to go and do some of the character dynamics and figure out how the characters worked. The only way I could do that was to have write a little bit, I
Mhm.
did a little bit on a screenplay format to hear them because I needed to know what they wanted. So I did their character arias, and then I was able to go back and go, "Oh, now I understand how they fit and how they don't fit together, and why this is gonna be an interesting and challenging experiment for both of them in the same place." So it's main character, but then she's got a co-lead that's really, really challenging for her. And I couldn't have done that if I had not done the character work.
Mhm.
Now I have to go back. What I haven't done is gone back and done it for everybody else because all the other characters need that. And the one character that I did start with, which is a really, really tiny little minor character, so the third person of the thing, who's not even significant to the book at all. I started to do that work with him and I fell in love with him. And now I'm like, well, what do I do with him? And if I fall in love with this little character who happens to be the janitor at the elementary school, but I got into his life and I went, oh my God, look at all the pain and drama and interesting stuff I can get into.
Mm.
What's it going to be like with everybody? So just the mere of act of me forcing myself to do that little bit of work started to get me excited about, well, I've got a whole town that I have to do that for. What if
Yeah.
what this is gonna be like a little, me walking through, you know, any town USA and knocking on every door and figuring out not just who they are on the surface, but
Yep.
what really drives them and what has been holding them back and what has been traumatic for them because that's that they could be their own little book. So I
Mhm.
think that once you get past the ugh, I have to, and you
Right.
start to enjoy the minutia, my God, that minutia is fun. So who knows how long it's going to take? Because this has
Yeah.
been so much fun so far.
But it's
We'll
a
see.
great way to look at it. I like how you say it because the way you describe it sounds like you're snooping, in their
Yes,
lives, looking in the medicine cabinet, looking in the
yes,
nightstand, seeing what's in the basement in each of those places,
right.
and that becomes a playful recon as opposed to drudgery, which is what we think
Yeah,
about first, right?
exactly. Yeah, you have to love the process, especially in novel writing. I think you have to love the process because there are many more words on the page than there are for a script. And with a script you can shorthand so many things. You don't have to tell me what a house looks like. You can tell me it's a, multifamily duplex or whatever, or, it's modest and then you're into the scene.
Mhm.
But in a book you need to really explore and examine so much more. But I also find it's a way to get lost and
Mm.
a way to really enjoy. I can't imagine what J.K. Rowling felt when she was writing Harry Potter,
Yeah.
but I can imagine it was magical because there
Mhm.
were so many wondrous things and she could think up so many amazing things. I think that some of those books that are like that, Series of Unfortunate Events, Spiderwick Chronicles, that they're just unlock your creativity and your playfulness. And I'm doing that on a much more serious, but also with this paranormal aspect. It's like the wonder and the crackle of, yeah, it's a town, but it's not just any town. There's other shit going on, excuse my language, that that makes me wanna come back and explore, and you really get to know these people because I'm gonna put them through the ringer, and they're gonna go on a
Mhm.
wild journey, so let me enjoy every ounce of this, and that's for me. So I think that that's one of the things that I love. I don't know how people write 10 books in their lifetime. I'm just like,
You don't have
I'll
hobbies?
be lucky if I get 3 out, right?
Right, right. Exactly. Well, I can't wait to see what you're doing with it and to, devour more of that when you are getting to the next steps. But thank you so much for being generous with your time and sharing your insights with us. We love talking to you, and, we will see you next time.
Thank you for having me. I've had a great time. I appreciate it, Nikki.
Brought to you by the Catalyst Story Institute.